Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our next edition of This Can Happen Insights. I am Zoe Sinclair, co-founder of This Can Happen, and I'm delighted to introduce you to Yvonne Smyth, who is Group Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Hays and Director of HR and the Legal Practice of Hays. Yvonne, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
So the way it's going to work, everyone, is I'm shortly going to be interviewing Yvonne, asking her a few questions, and specifically about a survey that Hays have just completed. But do feel free in your question box to send in any questions that you want that we will pose to Yvonne. On the right hand side of your screen, you should be able to see a control panel. If for any reason the control panel has closed, there's probably a little orange box with a white horizontal arrow in it. If you click on that, it will open up a control panel and you should be able to see a question box. It's a completely confidential question box, and the questions just come through to me. So feel free to type in any questions or comments at any time, and we will do our best to come to them. So Yvonne, let's get straight into it. So as you say, Hays have recently done a survey all about the returning to work, what that might look like, called Wellbeing Matters. And it ran, I believe, during April and May. Obviously, we're now in June. Things are ever evolving. But perhaps you could just highlight to us the main points, what this survey covers.
Sure, absolutely. So during lockdown, we've been running a number of surveys, actually, just looking at all sorts of aspects of the world of work. We're the world's largest staffing business and have all these touch points. And we really wanted to make most of that to really share what we're seeing with a wider population as we're all working, in our different ways at the moment. So we ran this survey and it was focusing on well-being. And we conducted the survey, as you said, Zoe, across April and May, so a point in time when for some lockdown was a relatively new thing, and obviously things are changing all the time. But we surveyed 16,000 professionals. So this survey did focus on people who were in the world of work, whether they were in a workplace, whether they were working at home, or indeed on furlough. But we asked them several questions around their perspective on the UK economy, recruitment intentions, because obviously we're a staffing business, skills, and for the purposes of our discussion today, well-being and the impact of the COVID-19 and the virus. And the comments or the responses were quite interesting. I think what I wanted to share with our audience today was we asked them to rate their positivity and their sense of well-being both before and since lockdown at that point in time. And by way of key findings, the sense and sentiment of positive well-being almost halved from all respondent groups. And that was regardless of gender, so male and female. All age groups apart from baby boomers were considerably down. And in particular, we found that a decline in positivity and the sense of well-being had decreased in perhaps areas which might not surprise us, so areas that have been impacted most significantly by lockdown. So hospitality kind of led the way there, and then followed by construction, and then followed by a group of the key worker professionals. So healthcare, supply chain, and social care. So quite interesting, perhaps not surprising. And the standout reason for the reason given for that kind of drop in positivity was a lack of social interaction. So that was about kind of 24%. And then we had loneliness and isolation at 12%. So quite a big drop there, but some variations there.
Okay, so obviously a huge amount of people took part in this survey. So, and obviously our speciality, if you like, is mental health. So how important is it, or did the survey show how companies need to address this and factor in mental health support or whatever it might be in the phase going back to work?
Yes, I mean, we asked lots of questions, and on the back of that made some recommendations in our report on what organisations kind of need to do, and indeed what employees need to do as well. It's very much a two-way street. So mental health was a really key consideration. Now, as time has gone on, I think that when we look at well-being, it's broadly kind of dividing into four areas, and we have mental health and well-being, physical health, well-being, social and financial, increasingly financial. But as far as the mental health side of it was concerned, of our respondents, 44% said that their awareness and the importance they're attaching to their own mental health had grown significantly since lockdown. And therefore, considerations as to how we support our workforce and our people with regard to their mental health has to be a top priority for all organisations. Again, response-wise, a couple of quite interesting stats came up there. So 77% of all the respondents said that they felt that their employer should have some responsibility for their employees, so their own personal kind of well-being. But really shockingly, I thought 49% of the respondents said that they had had no support, no perceived support from their employer since lockdown. So that was, at the end of May. So I found that quite shocking, particularly given some of the steps that, we're taking with our workforce. I'll just very briefly list when support was provided, what it was. It tended to be social activities, obviously a lot of it done online at the moment. We all love Teams and Zooms, counselling, training, and access to mental health services that were available online, so things like Doctor Online in particular.
Interesting. That stat is really quite shocking. And I think it's going to be a very interesting point in time now to see how hopefully mental health is accelerated onto companies' agendas. That's very much what we're hoping. But if in sort of April and May the support still hadn't been there, I think there's a lot to be done. We spoke before about discretion of companies, and perhaps you want to talk a little bit about that, especially when it comes to mental health support.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that when lockdown was announced, we were all in the same boat, and so organisations and individuals, we all had to move really quickly to adjust to a very new way of working. Or indeed, for those on furlough, not working, as 1 in 3, I think, of the working population now on furlough. So very quick exit, and clearly, decisions were having to be made. I think that levels of anxiety and stress, and we've spoken about financial well-being, social, physical, as well as mental health. I mean, we now know that those are going to have a legacy and some impact as we look to return. And as the lockdown and the rules around lockdown lighten, the level of personal judgment that we now all have to exercise in relation to our own circumstances. We know we've had 66 million versions of lockdown, haven't we? Diversity in its ultimate sense. But the levels of judgment we have to exercise to our own situation and how we respond, both as an individual and as a kind of society, and the responsibility we have to ourselves and to colleagues, as well as people that we come across, I think is going to just increase levels of anxiety even more, because there's just going to be differences of opinion, differences of values, difference of approach. And depending on one's personal mindset, you can come at this with positivity and a sense of, glass half full, and you can come at it with slightly more kind of, what if scenarios, and really kind of running to some quite extreme outcomes. And so I think that it's really important that we have a look at that. And one thing I just wanted to mention, Zoe, if you don't mind, is we were obviously in our report, we were interviewing people in the workplace. I just wanted to touch, if I may, on younger people and those who are, for example, still at school and not yet in this workplace. And it really does concern me, about the language that's being used and whether you're able to actually compute and understand, what does that mean for me? And I just, I tend to do this before I give a presentation. I just had a look at the news feeds this morning, some of the language being used, and it's all still, very much crisis, disaster type sentiment, which can only serve to increase areas of anxiety, particularly when you've got no real possibility to apply and kind of balance those perspectives. So, it's deadlines, it's crises, it's a generation left behind. What does it mean for your entire career if you're out of school for 6 months? Massive increased calls to the NSPCC in terms of, really acute situations like child abuse, domestic violence. We know they exist, but because they're being reported on so much, I think it becomes a much bigger issue. It needs to be dealt with. We know it's there, but when it becomes part of our common parlance and just the way in which we're reporting on the impact of COVID, all of this stuff is going to necessarily increase levels of anxiety.
And I think you make a really good point, and I think it becomes a challenge for the employer. There's a lot for the employer to take on board, and how much should they be doing? What should they be doing? I think that every level of society is being affected, and the employer finds himself in a very difficult position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, in our guide, we do set some recommendations out, which I'd like to share. I think that they are recommendations that are well made.
Yes.
And I'd like to share that, both from an employer and an employee perspective, because again, perhaps more so than any other environment, this is very much we have to work together to work our way through this. And everyone has a part to play. So it's not a kind of top-down instruction, it's kind of top-down and bottom-up. And how does communication, which I think wraps over everything, how is that played through and how are decisions made? So from an employer perspective, the essential and the kind of consistent element is going to be around frequent, transparent communication. Yeah. And communication that is, yes, dealing with the challenges of today, but also looking forward. This will pass. And a good leader, a good inclusive leader at the moment, is communicating regularly with honesty and has a lens, not just on the today, but also on the tomorrow. We might not have the solutions, but the fact that an employer is showing that they are talking about and they're thinking about what might the future look like with the well-being of their people as their first priority. This is employee-led. It is not employer-led at the moment. It's very much a two-way conversation. That will provide a level of, I think, assurance and security, in as much as we can provide that at the moment, because there are so many variables, clearly. So communication is really important, and that can be, by official communications by the CEO of an organisation. It's drop-in Q&As with line managers, and it's just allowing people's individual perspectives and experiences to be shared without fear of judgment at the moment. Yep. So that's what I would say as far as the employer side is concerned. As far as the employee side is concerned, don't second guess and don't assume that your employer or even the line manager that you know really well can really understand how you are coping and how you are dealing with the restrictions that are upon us and will continue to be on us. So you need to communicate back. I think it's important to be as objective as you can be, because ultimately businesses need to survive and they need to perform and thrive in order to, be still in existence. But leaning on your colleagues, not being embarrassed or concerned about showing what's on your mind, whether those are professional considerations or personal considerations, And now is a good time to have those conversations. You know, with the teams in the Zoom environment, we have seen all sorts of things going on in the background. You know, we have been in each other's lives more so than we have ever been before. So that kind of authenticity and being able to be your real self, which is such an important part of kind of inclusion, if you like, we can build on that. You know, there are very few gifts of COVID, but I think an inclusive work environment, collaboration with colleagues, and open and honest communication is one of the lessons we've learned that people like. And if we can, you know, maintain and continue with that, I think that would be, you know, excellent. And also clearly offer support to your colleagues. So just making sure you're available if anyone wants a virtual coffee or a chat and some shared experience. So putting yourself out there as a considerate colleague, I think, is also going to be helpful.
So essentially, as well, you're really talking about it's also a joint effort. It's collective responsibility here that everyone needs to play their part.
Yeah, I think that what's the, I can't think what the word is, the permission for the employee to put their perspective forward is more so there now than there ever has been before. I think from an employer perspective, there are clearly some very clear expectations in terms of what they need to do in terms of looking after their kind of employees' well-being. So as we look to, you know, return to work, I think that most organisations or return to a workplace in some shape or form, lightening of the lockdown, etc. It's very important for employers to stop and just take stock of what has worked well, what elements of the way in which they have run their organisations, run their businesses, worked with their colleagues, what have worked really well, and can we retain and move those, you know, continue with those. One of the areas that it's going to be absolutely essential that, again, you know, most organisations do is have properly look at risk assessment, and you know, that's going to have to be done on an individual basis. At the moment, it's going to be very, very time consuming. Policies will have to follow from that, formal, informal. Clearly something around remote working, hybrid working patterns is going to continue, but having a really detailed risk assessment and, frankly, checklist that you go through and someone has accountability for, and that goes all the way up to the, you know, you have to put the processes in place to run those checklists. That's going to be an essential element of any return to work, and we have some examples of that, if that would be helpful. One thing I just wanted to share, if I may, Zoe, some employers have been really quite nifty on this, and they almost see this return to this kind of new era of work, this new normal, as almost like a kind of a repeated onboarding, a refreshed onboarding process. So they are providing Q&A packs. They're providing videos of what does the office look like to provide some kind of assurance. You know, does it look like a crime scene with lots of kind of roped off areas? No, it doesn't, but clearly changes have been made. So just to be as transparent as possible and to provide assurance and show your workings to your employees as you're going through the decisions you're taking when we're looking at a kind of, you know, return, I think is going to be absolutely essential, and again will reduce anxiety and enable, frankly, colleagues to take decisions for themselves in a way that is as informed as possible.
Yeah, absolutely, and I sort of want to make that point that all these things are about managing people's mental well-being and helping them as well in this very strange world we find ourselves in. So it might not specifically be on mental health policies, but all the things that you're mentioning, the videos, the packs and everything, they help towards and show that you're a business that wants to support staff. There's quite a few questions now coming through, but just sort of one final one from me. In terms of companies that, you know, might have really been starting on their agenda, a caring workforce, concerned about mental health, they might have had the path already paved, and so anything that they've been doing during this time was just added on to what they had already done. For that very large statistic that you mentioned that came out of your survey of companies that haven't been supported, where do they start? What recommendations would you give to anybody, for example, on this call that might be part of a company that actually hasn't really done anything? Where to start?
So I think again, it's a two-way process, isn't it? So just because you haven't taken action doesn't mean that you shouldn't start. There is certainly a lessons learned piece there, and I think that one would have to kind of say, in the crisis of trying to survive, perhaps we've overlooked some things, but now we're starting to talk. So the starting point is communication, and I would say that the relationship between an employee and their manager. So from an employer perspective, you're the manager of people in your team, and then vice versa. That's, I think, where the conversation has to start, and it's simple as kind of it's checking in. From a mental health perspective, it is checking in, how are you, starting that conversation, and then it's how do you scale it to get a sense and sentiment across your wider workforce. So if you haven't been doing it, start doing something now. We're in this for a while. We're not all kind of going back en masse and everything is as it was before. We're going to be living in this significantly altered state for the foreseeable. So if you haven't, start doing it now, and you start with a conversation. You start with a conversation, and you start with communication from leadership. So the what, when, and how a leader of a business speaks to their people is going to be essential. And if you've been silent till now, you cannot be invisible. You have to make yourself visible and approachable.
Great, yeah, thank you. And so to say, because a number of people are asking to have the report, so what we will do is when we sort of send the follow-up from this, with always includes the recording, we'll send a link to the report to everybody that signed up for this as well. So to those people that have asked, when you get access to the report, absolutely, we will send you the link. Is that okay, Yvonne?
Yeah. Yes, and there's also, there's the wellbeing report, which I've referenced today, and that rather shocking statistic. And we also have actually a return to work guide for both employers and employees. So there are kind of three assets that I'd be very happy to share, which I think are really practical, that are being very well received by our customers. So I'm very happy to share all three of those.
Great, and somebody has asked actually, are there best practice examples or stories of return to work packs that you mentioned?
Yes, I can. Again, I mean, we're running quite a lot of roundtables at the moment, and there's all sorts of fabulous suggestions. I know that there's an agency at the moment that will provide like a white labeled product where you can do a kind of return to work little website with FAQs and all sorts of bits and pieces, and quite a lot of organisations that came from Robertson's actually, so a big construction company. So there are some examples. Again, I'll drop those in as much as I know them. I'll just give you a really practical example of the something that we did actually, and it's an interesting byproduct when you get the feedback. So in our American business, our CEO there was doing a town hall. This was before, obviously, we had all sorts of issues with Black Lives Matter, like when it really kind of came to the fore. But so about 4 weeks ago, he was doing a town hall, and he was showing and talking. He got all the employees on, and he was talking about the plans to phase a return to the office and putting employees first, and we want to hear from you, and we'll be consulting with you, and really emphasising that and showing all of our workings, because as I say, we've gone through a huge amount of kind of pre-planning as we plan our return. And interestingly, again, just the circumstances we were in, we have quite a large kind of younger employee base. And at the end, when it was like, has anyone got any questions? Someone's mother came on the phone and she was crying, and she said, can I just say, I'm sat here in the room because I'm so worried about, little Jimmy kind of going back to work, but everything you have told me, I'm just so assured as his mother, so I know he's in the best possible hands. And there she was, kind of sobbing on the phone. Now, most people wouldn't have their mother listening in on a work call, but clearly it was that important that he had invited her to come on, and she had wanted to come on. So it goes deep, and it affects so many different people. And again, I just wanted to share that as something really practical. That's an example of showing your workings.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps in the UK, is there anything specific that you are leading on with your own employees? Are people beginning to return to work, to offices, or people still working at home? What have you got in place?
Yes, well, we were as a professional services business, and we didn't actually have really that many people working flexibly at all previously. I mean, we had, like, you know, a relatively low percentage. So we pivoted the entire business, as did so many, you know, of our peer group, to returning working from home within about 4 days flat. So that's now become our new normal. We're thinking about a return, a phased return, and we have started to run a pilot in a number of our offices that their location isn't dependent on public transport. So we're just starting with our phase 1 of some gradual reopenings. It's, as I say, entirely employee-led. We have a senior responsible individual, an SRI, in each office. We're working to a very detailed checklist that SRI is responsible for. Clearly, there's all sorts of place and space planning that we've been doing, and we're just starting to get the feedback. We opened our first phase of offices about 10 days ago, so we're just getting the feedback from those who are now coming in saying, I think we need X, Y, and Z. So if we've had blind spots, we're kind of learning as we go along. So we haven't gone large on it. We've a limited opening, getting feedback along the way, making sure it's entirely employee-led, assuming we'll have only a relatively small percentage of people back in the office anyway. We've set limits on percentages of people that can come back. And what we are expecting to see is that a few people go back, and then a few more, and then we'll obviously cap out. And if I'll just take Germany for an example, they've been doing this, you know, we have a global plan. They've been doing this for a little while now, they're a little bit ahead of us. And confidence levels are definitely returning to the point actually that we've kind of hit the cap, which is about 30% of people going back. So those that have wanted to, we've kind of said, no, you need to kind of fit into the rota now. Clearly, just very quickly, as part of the assessment, and this being employee-led, there will be some individuals who are not, they're finding it very stressful being at home. So again, the consultation that you need to go through at a, you know, line by line, employee by employee level, that can't be underestimated in terms of the importance it's got. So and
in fact, someone's asked that a similar question, basically to say, how do you deal with your line managers? I suppose this is from a Hays perspective, specifically they're asking, but if someone is feeling those anxieties, that how are you assuring that a manager isn't going to judge them, but at the same time wanting people to speak up about how they're feeling, but ensuring that their line manager is not, what's the word?
Well, yeah. Again, I think it's just it reflects the environment, doesn't it? Where this is now employee-led for us, and all of or a number of the ways in which we would measure commitment and performance. You know, we don't have to be in an office to do our jobs. You know, we have a lot of customers who are now recruiting. You know, they are interviewing, onboarding people remotely. You know, recruitment is still going on. So we're all adjusting. We don't have to be in the office to do our jobs. Clearly, there are other industries and organisations where you have to have your workforce in order to, you know, continue. So we're probably in a slightly different situation. We are not passing any judgments. There's a little bit of probably realigning of expectation in terms of what does kind of commitment mean. We obviously have to look at measurements in terms of productivity and performance. but we also are having that ongoing conversation about how are you finding this. So there's a little bit of nudging and adjustment you have to probably give to line managers who are used to kind of walking the floors and getting their teams going and everyone's in their line of sight. But we've been getting used to that over the course of the last 8-9 weeks.
Okay,
so we're more comfortable. Yeah.
Wonderful. And just sort of one sort of final question, perhaps. Obviously, you've done a very, very big survey, and I think a lot of companies are thinking about surveying their own staff, about how their staff are feeling, their mental health, where they're at, about returning to work, that sort of thing. What do you think about the importance of surveying your staff in making decisions? And should you wait until all the relevant data has come in to make decisions, or should you just get started? What do you think of that?
I think surveying is really important. Listen, the first level is conversations. It's having a conversation. It's trying to capture patterns of what's happening right now. I think the next level is, in terms of formalization and having some kind of data set, is probably a pulse survey of some shape or form. It can be very simple. On a level of 1 to 5, how comfortable are you coming into work? How inclined are you to come to work? What concerns do you have? So I think a survey is important. And I think that's probably the starting point. And if you haven't done it, you probably need to start doing it. It's in our kind of checklists and our recommendations of what we should be doing on a consistent basis. So I think you need to have a template you're working to.
Right.
Just the very last bit, the point about, do we have everything in? Can we have planned for every eventuality before we start taking action? No, we do not have the time to do that. We exited very quickly because we had to. We have time to plan a return. You have to be looking forwards. We know we're going to be in this for a while, so you need to start taking the action now to have a well-structured and well-organised return. But there's going to be variables along the way all the time. We're going to have to stay agile. We're going to have to stay, change is a really big kind of thing at the moment. We have to be aware of and be worried about kind of change fatigue, but it's here and it's here to stay. So we need to embrace it and make the best of it, and make sure that we're there to support our colleagues. Whether you are a leader of a business or someone who's a new jobber, the newest entrant, we all have a part to play, I think, at the moment.
Yvonne, thank you so much. Really just given us a really good intro into things that we need to think about. And at the end of the day, all these decisions affect colleagues and leaders' mental well-being as well. And it's just about, as you said, trying to make a smooth transition into our next phase as possible. But thank you everybody for joining us. As I said, we will include the wellbeing report and the recommendations with the recording within the next 24 hours, so you will all receive that. Yvonne, thanks so much indeed for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure.
And we'll speak to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Keep well, everyone. Bye-bye now.